Well, good evening. The first thing I want to do is to thank Malcolm for coming over from Canada to deliver this annual lecture of the Corpus of Romanesque sculpture. And I would like to welcome him and his wife Carol to this occasion, despite the fact that he's providing it. Malcolm's academic biography began very early indeed. When he started as an undergraduate at East Anglia in 1968, he came with a relevant nickname, which I know that some of you know, but I don't know that many people will. He was known as Malcolm Fonts Thurlby. And the reason for this was that when he was at school, he spent, and some people might have thought, inordinate amount of time, along with football, studying the sculpture of medieval fonts. And since his home was in Rickmansworth, you just have to think of that valley going to the west. He had the most magnificent Romanesque fonts almost on his doorstep. So this set the direction of his scholarly quest. So about his employment. After acquiring his doctorate at East Anglia in 1976, he emigrated to Canada. And since 1983, he's been in the employ of York University in Toronto, where he has accounted for several noteworthy doctorates, and I underline that word noteworthy. This isn't just a matter of opinion, and I could give you chapter and verse. Also, more MAs than I have had hot dinners. I'd use exactly the same parallel for the number of conferences that he has organized. Everyone is in his debt for this contribution. Publications. He has published books on the Romanesque architecture and sculpture of Wales, Herefordshire, and Gloucestershire. And then there are all the articles and chapters on Romanesque buildings in numerous places in England, Wales, and Scotland. There is only one article about a building on the continent, and that is the Abbey of Lessay. I mention this because it is so hopelessly misleading. In fact, Malcolm has traversed vast areas of the Latin Church, driving cars and simply examining the buildings, recording them. His slide collection is astronomical. And may I also mention that he is very generous in providing copies of those slides for publications. So, you know, he's really made a difference. His life in Canada illustrates the continuity of his original attitude to those Romanesque fonts. What I'm thinking of is he wants to understand what is prominent in his immediate art historical landscape, which means that he has done a huge amount of work, including publications, on Gothic revival buildings in Canada. In fact, his work on this has been so perceptive that he is now a player in the study of English Gothic revival architecture. But back to the Romanesque. The title of Malcolm's lecture this evening is, as you can see, The Architectural Setting of English Romanesque Sculpture. Malcolm.
Thank you, Eric. Can you all hear me? You all see the screen now. If I move that around, is that okay, or would you prefer?
There's a stick behind you, Malcolm.
So do I pole vault to make sure people are paying attention? Thank you very much, Eric, for the introduction. In fact, it leads in perfectly to just a couple of introductory remarks. The first being very autobiographical. I attended Watford Grammar School for Boys. I think it kicked off in 1960. There's a period in my life that I didn't particularly enjoy. I didn't like school. I wasn't very good at school. But it was coming up to O-level, and I was doing things like chemistry, physics, and biology, intending to go on for that at A-level. And then as a frill subject, I did art, and as part of the art curriculum, it was the Oxford and Cambridge joint examination. We had to do the history of the parish church in England. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be so boring. You handed out the textbooks, and it was Cox and Ford, English parish churches. And I just randomly opened it up. A life-changing moment. Plate 55A. A detail of the south portal of Kilpeck Church. And that was it. My life changed. I knew immediately what I wanted to do. And I'm very grateful I'm still doing it as I reach senior years. So that was fine. And then, as Eric noted, close to where I lived in Rickmansworth, there was the Aylesbury Group of Fonts, 20 miles away, Aylesbury to Rickmansworth. And so I started to collect these, going around photographing and so on and so forth. And at the age of 15, I didn't get too far. It was all very complicated. So I thought, who's an expert on this stuff? And so I suppose I could say with the arrogance of a teenage boy, I wrote to this bloke, George Romanesque at Courtauld. And he wrote back, this is pre-email days, and he said, well, why don't you come and see me? Which I did, and he was amazingly helpful. He loaned me books that were very helpful, and it certainly helped a student with less than stellar academic record go to the University of East Anglia, which, as Eric noted, I did in 1968, and I think the modern term is, the rest is history. So I am very, very grateful to George, not only for that, but also in the present situation for the Corpus. I mean, this is such a fabulous organisation, and one that has allowed me to develop a course at York. I'll be teaching it again in the fall on English Romanesque sculpture, and the kids, the textbook is the Corpus website, so kids can choose to work with it. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. When we were making the arrangements for my visit here, one of the requests was a short bio, which I sent to someone. And somehow David Robinson got hold of it, not quite sure how. And he emailed me with, what could I say, concern, complaint, one or the other. Let's see, it's going the wrong way. He said, but you didn't put in two of the really key things. One, my love of carry-on movies. So for you, David, Charles Portrait of Daniel Dan, public convenience attendant from Carry On Screaming. And then The Muppet Show. Best show ever on TV. I have it in front of an exercise bike, a little small screen, and I have all the DVDs. And I specifically single out Sam the Eagle, thinking, yes, in this situation I can give you a test. Which is the best beakhead sauce for Sam the Eagle? There is an incredible resemblance. But it also leads me in to the notion of fun. And those of you that know the Muppets know that Sam's always very serious. Too much fun, frivolity. And I've always been against that. It kind of reminded me of one of my former colleagues at York who never liked the idea of fun and would say, if students are having fun, then they're not being serious. And I take exactly the opposite attitude. If you're not having fun, go off, find something else to do that gives you fun. And with that in mind, I will quote here from a CRSBI tweet. Hope to see as many of our friends and supporters there as possible. That's for the evening. All are welcome to join in the fun. And I thought, isn't that great? So I hope we'll have some fun this evening. I hate working from a written text. I much prefer to work from the images on the screen, but I do have an introduction that does outline what I hope to do this evening. The dating of English Romanesque architectural sculpture is usually, and I believe quite correctly, considered in relation to the date of the fabric in which the sculpture is set. For example, the north and south doorways of the nave of Durham Cathedral, which I don't have, it's on the CRSBI handouts there, normally dated to around 1130, for which there is documentary evidence relating to the construction of the high vault of the nave between 1128 and 1133. Similarly, the Durham Chapter House sculpture is dated with the construction of that edifice by Bishop Geoffrey between 1133 and 1140. Yet, there are cases where discrepancies exist between the date of the building and the date of the sculpture, when details of the sculpture are deemed, usually for stylistic reasons, to be incompatible with the architecture. Additionally, there are cases where it's suggested that additions of doorways or parts of doorways are added soon after the original fabric has been completed. Today it's my aim to explore some examples of what I see as unsubstantiated dating of quote-unquote later features. In all cases, I'll be arguing for an integrated or holistic view of the building, rather than one that argues for a modification or modifications to a building that may have been completed 10, 15 or 20 years earlier. The process has been labelled by Eric Fernie as architectural synthesis as opposed to architectural analysis. I can borrow that phrase from Eric. In addition to that, I'll be examining aspects of painted sculpture and painted articulation of buildings, something I think is always so important to take into account with the building as a whole. Stucco sculpture, very little discussed. Victorian copies of Romanesque sculpture and how we might consider those. And what I consider to be references to Roman sources of Roman sculpture. So all that's going to be put up into a package for you. So now the serious stuff begins. We kick off at Worcester Cathedral, where it's documented as start of Romanesque fabric starting 1084. Under the leadership of Bishop Wulfstan, an Anglo-Saxon survivor, eventually in 1095, and documentation that the monks moved into the new building in 1089. So as far as the present plan, which is taken from the builder, it's the transept area. We don't have the east end, although the crypt still remains below. But specifically for this evening, I'm going to be considering this part of the south transept. So it's an arch that looks into that side of the chapel that came around here. And there it is. On the left, we look at that arch from the east side. So in Romanesque terms, I'm inside the chapel and looking west. We take a detail from the outside. I'm standing down about here and looking up at the other side of these capitals. And on the right screen, Richard Gem's reconstruction of the south transept elevation from the British Archaeological Association conference transactions for 1978. So it's this arch that we're looking at in particular. The capitals, as you see, nicely carved, excuse me, cushion capitals have been variously dated. Contemporary with the 1084 construction through to the latest that I came across, at 1175, which seems a tad late to me. It would be my suggestion that we should look at this in terms of the use of the building. A function in 1089, then this arch would have been completed. Structurally, it is necessary to have so that we can construct the gallery and up to the clear story. So to leave that for any appreciable time seems unthinkable. I would agree with Uta Engel in her monograph on Worcester Cathedral that what we are dealing with here is something that is completed by 1089 and not anywhere later. I should just go back for a second there. For the capitals, George Janetsky, in his article in the same Transactions, BAA Transactions, made a wonderful comparison between the foliated cushion capitals and the Copenhagen Gospels, an Anglo-Saxon book somewhere in the first half of the 11th century. Pardon me, I don't have a decent slide of that, but I do illustrate here on the left. New York Morgan Library's manuscript 869, a Canterbury product, probably of the first 2 years of the 11th century, with, as you see, some beautifully foliated capitals, and with the important point that what we see here is, I think, an accurate reflection of the sort of capital decoration that would have gone on in real Anglo-Saxon buildings of the first half of the 11th century. Along with that, we can go to the undecorated form of cushion capitals. There, that's Cotton, British Library, Cotton manuscript, Claudius B4. And I will do my own interpretation of the iconography here. Oh, look, guys, here's how to recognize a cushion capital. So there you have early part of the 11th century for an Anglo-Saxon cushion capital. And to indicate that I'm not being frivolous or completely wacky, I hope, about this, that what we do see in Anglo-Saxon manuscript illumination is a reflection of much of the architecture of the period. And with that in mind, we look at this. That is a detail of one of the nave capitals in Holy Trinity Great Paxton, in what I know as Huntingdonshire. And I will label this maybe the Canadian burger capital. A good fat patty, which is, I think, reasonably close enough to what we find in the manuscript. Another thing that I think is very significant about the Worcester Arch is that on the west face we see a fair bit of painted decoration. And working with the synthetic approach, I would like to argue that what we see here is either original 11th century work or perhaps a late 12th century reworking of it after there was damage to the cathedral in 1175. The main reason for thinking that it is contemporary, other than the principle of working on this holistic approach, is that just down the road in St. Peter's Abbey, Gloucester, now the cathedral, we get something in the Treasury Arcade there. This is the slight passage to the north of the north transept. And it seems to me that this sort of decoration is not a million miles removed from the sort of thing we have here. Gloucester's commenced in 1089, and this part would have been completed by 1100. They're virtually contemporary. So the paint on the architecture, something that's very important to its overall conception. And then if we once again return to the manuscript illumination, here I have the Harley Gospels from the British Library, a detail of the canon table. And I would like you to look, strain your eyes here and look very, very closely the decoration we have coming around here. These paired lines with, very accurate terminology here, little squiggly bits, which are remarkably close to what we have. It's a thick, big marble decoration. So again, I would see this as something that is continuing an Anglo-Saxon tradition, which, in the situation with an Anglo-Saxon patron wishing to continue, I think, the idea of things being local, that works very, very nicely. Just one other little throw out here. Sorry, I'm going back. There we go. Lake Hampstead in Buckinghamshire. Very interesting tympanum there, but I thought it was also interesting to pop in the decoration above the carved part of the tympanum. Also, you see painted voussoirs alternating there. This also has been split. Charles Keyser's Norman two-part lintels see that well separated, at least 40 or 50 years. Most recent view, both on the CRSBI website and Rita Wood's book on Paradise, thinking that things should be put together, and that is the view I would like to uphold today. We move now to Wiltshire, the little village of Nook, and there is a detail of the south doorway. As you see, we're looking at the carved tympanum, cushioned capitals, and then that big roll moulding that runs around the outside. And this has been published both as Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Norman. I think George is last thing putting into the 12th century, suggesting what seemed to me to be some very close parallels with manuscripts from Rouen. It's interesting to look at the documentation for Nook, particularly as it's recorded in the Domesday Book. We learn from that it was held by Colin and his wife, Leofheat, if my pronunciation is wrong there, apologies. And she was embroiderer for both Edward the Confessor and William I. So continuity over the conquest. And I would think we could even suggest that maybe she could have had a hand in the design, change embroidery into the timber. How about trying to get specific, or as specific as we can, on the dating? First thing is if we look at the voussoirs coming around here, one could well think, oh my word, yeah, this is an Anglo-Saxon architect. Mason work, because some of the stones, this in particular, it's a wacky, great big stone, and that is very much more in character with Anglo-Saxon construction than with Anglo-Norman. But, and I think methodologically this is the most important point I have to make. One thing I think we don't do sufficiently is look at the other side of the door. What does that tell us about the construction? Well, there it is. And particularly if we look at the voussoirs, you experience the regularity that we didn't have on the outside. And looking at that, that does strike me as being the work of a craftsman, if not from Normandy, certainly one who was experiencing the new Norman way of building things. So I think we are dealing with something that is clearly post-conquest. We'll take you now to Gloucestershire, one of my favourite little churches there, Coleman Rogers. Nice springtime shop with daffodils to cheer you up as well, the general view on the left. And then on the right screen here, I'm just going into detail, very specifically the coins that I want to look at there, but the window and the drain pipe will give you your bearings very, very happily. And we see here what you might think of as very, very consistent, fine example of Anglo-Saxon long and short work. So most commentators will say, yes, it's Anglo-Saxon. There's a bit of detail for you. And we're zooming in on the right to this area. It's the lowest stones we have of that southeast corner of the lane. And you've got, again, technically something that is much more in keeping with Anglo-Saxon tradition, a large stone which is then carved with the stepping up that was there. Good, we will take you inside, which we did on the left, looking at the chancel arch. On the right, I'm just taking the left side and an angled view so that you can see the construction very happily there. Basically 3 stones, large chunks of masonry, and we could in fact say long, short and long there. 3 stones in the arch, and then nicely moulded in post. And one thing that I just as an aside, a little tangent, look at the outer order, which is of course perfectly plain, but you've got the alternation of a continuous and a non-continuous order. That very feature that Sir Harold Breakspear, writing in 1931 on his West Country School of Masons, said, this is absolutely characteristic of the West Country School. Well, here we are in the West Country, somewhere late 11th, early 12th century. So it's set back well before the beginnings of Breakspear's school in the 1170s. So we move to the south doorway of the nave. There it is, outside on the left, inside on the right, and there we have something that again all commentators say, oh well, this is normal. Anywhere in the first half of the 12th century. The point I made at Nook about the regularity of voussoirs running around there, the fact that we also have twin scallop capitals advertise this as a Norman piece. What I'd like to suggest to you today is that the Anglo-Saxon, quote unquote, and the Norman are in fact contemporary. Connected probably with a date of 1105, when Roger of Gloucester, knight, being dangerously wounded at Wallaston in battle, gave the manor of Colin Rogers to the monks of St. Peter's Abbey, Gloucester, cathedral, to pray for his soul. And so I think the reference to the latest stylistic feature in the building, this Norman work, accounts for the date of the whole building, primarily using Anglo-Saxon masons, but this certainly Anglo-Norman. And the idea that if we don't integrate these two, we can be dealing with a situation with, say, 1090 for the Anglo-Saxon fabric. What was there for a doorway that needed to be replaced 15 years later? Most unlikely. So I think an integrated approach works very, very much better. We can extend the examination and interpretation to this. We return to the chancel arch. There we've got the impost. Here, the parallel work, not far away at Daglingworth in Gloucestershire. Particularly just note the little beads between the chamfer and the upright at that point. We go on at Daglingworth. 3 images here. General view from the southwest of the nave, particularly with the Anglo-Saxon long and short point, which we detail for you here in the centre, and match that up with the southeast corner of the nave. So again, technically speaking, stylistically speaking, an Anglo-Saxon work. But then we keep that general view on the left, and what I'm doing on the right is to zoom in to that window. There it is. You have to look very, very closely indeed. Perhaps if I just pointed out, this is a single stone that we use here, with incisions to indicate where the voussoirs should be. So they're fictive voussoirs, and probably going to be picked out in paint as well. This is not an uncommon feature in the West Country, and I choose as a random example your old Kilpeck in Herefordshire. 1132 gift to St. Peter's Abbey in Gloucester, and I would regard for the purpose of this evening to say, okay, they are near contemporary work. So that is later, I think, in the sequence of 1134, but certainly into the 12th century for the sort of thing we have at Dangleworth. And further, that's not a window that is punched through after 10, 15, 20 years. Oh, it's dark in here, we'd better bash a window through. No, the window was an integral part of the design. We continue again with this Gloucestershire, and we're still at Dangleworth. This is the South Doorway, and on the right screen we're zooming into detail of that. And it's this wheatier motif that we find at that point, which we find reasonably closely at Southrock in Gloucestershire. And it's a bit more elaborate up top, but the similarity here, and the chamfer is really quite keen. And if we look elsewhere at Southrock, as in the North Doorway, which I illustrate on the screen now, that is something that I would regard as purely post-1066 Norman work with classic volute capitals of left and right, billet ornament, the mouldings, and even the tympanum there as well. So something, which we say around 1100, that will fit very, very happily with the work at Dangleworth. There's a further wrinkle here, and I'm going out much more on a limb with this one, but I certainly think it's worthwhile. We've got a drawing on the left of the original arrangement of the west end of the nave of Dangleworth. So the arch here, seriously depressed arch, before restoration, looked east there before the nave. We would have been working with a gallery area in which there was a separate ulcer. And there is the ulcer, indicated with these very interesting ballast or bulbous shafts with these scalloped capitals. All that is gone, except the shafts and capitals have been reused in the chancel. There's a previous table there, and I show you the general view and then the detail on the right. Now I think if somebody showed me that and said, well, what date do you think it is, I may say mid-12th century or something like that. But I'd like to suggest to you this evening that perhaps it's rather earlier, and in fact goes with everything else that we've been looking at, and as a general support for the potentially early dating of rich, varied scallop capitals like this. I'll just make two references. The arcades, blind arcades, dado arcades at Durham Cathedral, 1096 to 1104, was a remarkable variety in scallop capitals, and perhaps more relevant for a church in Gloucestershire, Gloucester Cathedral. You go into the nave aisles of Gloucester Cathedral, which I think was started, if not before 1100s, but certainly soon afterwards. The variety of scallop capitals is mind-boggling. They're not easy to look at because they're the terrible spotlights that come there. But if you can get the bottom off, go and have a look and you will see things that are not a million miles removed from this. And finally, just they're kind of cute, I put in the two of the four panels, and I think three of which were reused in the jambs of the chancel arch. So whatever date you put on that, they predated and could be what, 9th, 10th century. There we go. I always think when I publish anything that I want to make some sort of contribution. It's really great if people come along and pat you on and say, oh wow, that's really good. But also it's good if somebody says, no, I think you got that wrong for the following reason. Now I can stand up here and say, this is something I published, oops, I think I goofed. Right screen, you have a capital from the chancel arch of Bibury in Gloucestershire, a church that belonged to Worcester Cathedral. On the left I returned to Worcester to show one of the capitals from our South Transept Chapel Arch. And I suggested, this was a few years back, that the Bibury capital is perhaps post-conquest, based on stuff at Worcester and under the patronage of Bishop Alston, so before 1095. And one of the points I made was that the little quirk, little section that runs along there, was almost certainly post-conquest detail, and I had foolishly overlooked that it did in fact exist at Sherborne Abbey, probably during the time of Bishop Elfwald II, 1045 to 58. So there's Sherborne for you, we stay with Bible on the left. And I think all I can say right now is that, well, the debate's over, maybe pre, maybe post-conquest. We can argue about it. But again, with reference to pre-conquest stuff, I return to our Morgan Library manuscript in saying that that is not a million miles removed from what you have there. Good. We take you off to Hereford, a place I love. It's the Castle House Hotel. And if you go to the pub rather than the restaurant, you can sample spotted dick, something that sadly has not been exported across the pond to Canada. So wait for my spotted dick. Anyway, Hereford Cathedral is a building that I've done a fair bit of work on, and not least looking at the sculpture. The dating of the sculpture has varied a bit, some of it being associated with Robert the Lotharingian, 1075 to 95. Otherwise, Bishop Rainhelm, 1107 to 1115. And it's important here to note that it is the cathedral that is Rainhelm. Robert the Lotharingian is the bishop's chapel, so the documentation has nothing to do with what we see here. The angel is from the East Presbytery Arch at Hereford. And I'll show you the location in just a moment. But I did want at this stage to show that this flying angel belongs to a very well-established Anglo-Saxon tradition. Newminster Charter there from 966, a sculpture from St. Lawrence, Bradford on Avon, wall painting, to throw in another medium, from Nether Wallop. And then the location, the capital we've just been looking at Hereford is located there. So perfectly good Romanesque foundation from, as I say, 1107 to 1115, and the sculpture should be studied in context. So there it is for you. I want to move now into the notion of Victorian copies and what we do with them. What we have is the original capital here, which is now set up on a template there. And next to it you see the copies of the original. So look at that, look at that. And you can see that what the Cottings have done there is to create what I think is a very accurate copy of the original Romanesque work. If we didn't have that, we can in fact use the Victorian work as a pretty accurate representation of what was there. Very quickly I'll show you a couple more. Daniel, there's Samson, the lion. There's the copy on the left, the original on the right. Harrowing of Hell scene, again, copy of the original. And that then leads on to looking at the crossing capitals. And we don't have all the originals of those remaining, but one or two. There is one, there you can see the copy. So I would argue that when you're looking around Hereford and looking at the Victorian work there, what we see, certainly in the majority of cases, perhaps right the way through, is not just something invented by the historians, but something that is a copy of the original. I'll spend a little more time looking at Herefordshire work, again, something close to my heart, and a concern about the interpretation of a number of doorways, particularly those with these richly carved lintels like this. And this is a breadwooding in Herefordshire. And it's frequently been suggested that what we have here is an early 12th century doorway with the lintel and capitals inserted 10, 15, 20 years later. And not surprisingly, I would like to argue that we have everything together in one shot. So let's look at that. If we go along the road to Castle Frome, famed because of its richly carved font, there the south doorway, very plain and simple, but the elements that we see are exactly the same. We have an original lintel, so the formation of that doorway is a simple version of the sort of thing we have at Redwoodie. Similar sort of thing at Hampton Bishop, just to the east of Hereford, different range of motifs, but again, an integrated approach here. You can relate the chevron ornament with work in the cathedral very happily. And when it comes to the detailing of this chip carving on the Redwoodie South Doorway lintel, you can look to Cottingham's work of Hereford, that's above the Harrow of Helsey. Also in the presbytery capitals you see the same sort of chip carving with the saltire crosses. Moving into the Herefordshire School of Sculpture, so I take you to Rollstone, again to show you something that I think in certain detail and in proportion fits well with Redwoodie. We don't have a lintel here, it's sort of extended tympanum that comes down, but there's the roll moulding. And I think in both cases we're dealing with something that is created at one particular time. If we go to the north doorway of Redwoodie, on the left, there you see another one of the nice carved lintels. And then back to Castle Frome, this time the priest's door on the south side of the chancel. And here, and I think this is a very significant point of view, that is a single stone that we're looking at there. And yet the design as a whole is something that is essentially the same as this, which suggests that the lintel and the arch are all done in one shot, designed as one. As a further indication of this, we move just down the road to Letton on the right screen. The blind man and galloping horse can see the similarity and the difference in the stones. But there are details at Letton that I think assist in the integrated reading of the work. So I show you the tympanum and lintel as a whole on the left. What I'm doing on the right is just to zoom in to this area. So there you see a cushion capital was carved with this wonderful zigzag shaft and the beginning of the arch around here. And you see that is integrated with the roll moulding that runs right the way around, and we pick up with another detail of a cushion capital on the left screen. There it is in detail, and we follow this down. We can also do the same on the right. You've got the base in there as well. Now, that to me only makes sense if we see the entire doorway as a whole constructed in one, or designed and constructed in one shot. And I could go on with many examples, but I show you a beautifully preserved whole Norman church of Moccas in Hereford, and there you've got another nice doorway done in the local red sandstone, contrasting with the tufa that's used here. They wanted the red sandstone because it's good for carving. And I think, well, penultimately, Aston in Herefordshire, 3 different types of stone used on the north doorway. South doorway is plain, it's now in the vestry, and there, another one of our whopping big lintels. Why did they look like that? Because they're looking back at Roman stuff. And here, because I happen to have a slide of it, Neen Simone, the Roman site there, just north of the city of Nice, and there you've got, albeit in somewhat restored state, the big lintel and the arch that is sitting on it. Finally, with this group, Erdesley. Most of you will know the Erdesley font, which I detail there. It's a classic example of the Herefordshire school. There's also a fragment of what was part of a doorway, a jambs. You've got the top of a head there. But also, I think I first discovered this on the CRSBI website by Ron Baxter. The sill of the east window of the south aisle has this. So this beautiful chip carving, which looks remarkably close to the lintels that Brett that we've been looking at. And I would simply like to suggest that, again, perhaps we have something that is contemporary here. What is normally considered earlier in the evolution of sculpture in Herefordshire is with this, but perhaps it's in fact contemporary with the work of the Herefordshire School. Very quickly I will take you to Ely, not that I've got anything profound to say about the cathedral sculpture there, but I think there is one important methodological point that is not a Thurlby original, but carefully stolen from John Bilson, writing on Durham Cathedral way back in 1922. So there's the famous prize door. We all know the tympanum, the beautifully carved voussoirs around there. We go inside, so that is the back side of the carved tympanum we've just been looking at. And what I want you to pay particular attention to is the coursing of the masonry to the left and right. When Bilson was arguing that the vault, the nave vault of Durham Cathedral was built with the nave itself, it could not possibly be an addition. He looked at the coursing of the masonry to either side of the vault springs. And he said, look, if you draw lines, they don't line up. The wall must have been built with the vault, vice versa. And this is also appropriate here. That was, I think, look here, there's one course of masonry. It's taller than the course we have there. That is slightly taller than we have there. There's a narrower course. In other words, the coursing of the right side of Ashlar does not agree with what's on the left. The doorway is built with the fabric. You can play with what you like on the precise datings, the absolute datings, but it has to be contemporary with the fabric. And also, whilst we're at Ely, I think it's important to integrate the painting as well. So we've got a view looking east in the south nave aisle, so the prize door is behind us, but it's this area of painted groin that we have to look at. There it is in a bit more detail, looking from the other side, looking from the east. So the roundel you see there is the very roundel you see at that point, and we can take in a further detail, which I do on the right. And it seems to me that this comes, it's from the same nursery, same garden centre as the foliage that is used here on one of the shafts of the south doorway. So painting and sculpture are going together, the workshops are talking to each other. And with the idea of paint, I think that's another thing that also deserves a bit more attention. I take you back here to Anglo-Saxon Deerhurst Priory, early part of the 9th century, foundation of 804. There, one of the very well-known label stocks from the inner west doorway. There, perhaps a little less well-known, but a painted head, and I recommend publications by Richard Bryant and Emily Howe on this. And you can see that the carving is very simple. But the detailing comes not from the sculpture, the carving we see here, but it's put on with paint. And I think, for example, I mentioned beakheads earlier on. The number of simple beakheads that we encounter add a bit of paint here and there, and you'll have them as originally intended. St Nicholas's Priory, Exeter, now in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and photographed by me some years back with wonderful cooperation from Paul Williamson before he retired. And so we dragged this out so I could photograph this. So you've got a fairly standard volume cabinet, but one of the best preserved with its original painted decoration on it. And to return to Herefordshire, we can follow the same theme. And C, well, this is Hereford Cathedral. It's the step motif that is used on the nave capitals. There is a related work on Monmouth Priory. That's a screen course on the west front. But I'd also like to throw in Kempley Church, one of the best preserved painted churches that we have from Norman England. And quite clearly we have a sort of expanded version of the type of motif we see there. At Kempley we can follow these architectural and sculptural details in the painting. Number one, the segmental form of the arch. It's not a semicircular, segmental. Where do we use that? Hereford Bishop's Chapel. There it is. So Bishop Robert the Lotharingian building that 1079 to 95. One other detail we see at Kempley is this. You see these little roundels that are used on the arch? That's not the painter's invention, but we encounter it, for example, just east of Hereford in the little village of Carrington. If you want to go down to Llandaff Cathedral, you find the very same motif used in the presbytery arches. It started 1120. And I think on this last connection, just let me look at that. No, it's not quite. But again, to look at Kempley, wonderful advertisement for painted chevron and also the painted decoration you have there, which I think is just a reflection of the sculptural work you have in the presbytery galleries at Hereford Cathedral. And then Blythe Priory in Nottinghamshire, one of the most remarkable survivals, I think because there was a screen across here. The east respond of the south nave arcade, ashlar construction, plastered and painted over, imitation acanthus painted on there. And here on the right screen, the adventures I get into up above the nave vaults, very dirty. And it was a 19th century reference I came across, I don't recall the exact detail, but it said, oh, and if you go above the nave vault, you will see original painted decoration. This is 1858 or so time. And I thought, I've never seen mention of that in any of the literature on Blythe Priory. But I went up, there it is for you. So, two things to remind you of. Always look at Victorian sources very, very closely. They observe things particularly well. And as I always say to my students, try to get in to the parts of the building where most people don't go. Because people don't worry about it. You don't clean it up, you don't spruce it up, you don't restore it. There it is. So there's Blythe Priory for you. And once again, the importance of this integration. You will know Durham Cathedral, the wonderful lozenge pier. The design is identical to a fragment that is from St Mary's Abbey, York, and look very closely at these intersections that we have in relation to what we have there. And also from St Mary's Abbey, some simple ashlar. See this incision. And I maintain that where you see this, that is where we have the guideline for the painter to come along. So seeing architecture, painting, sculpture altogether is something very important. An aspect we appreciate if we go to Cold Aston or Aston Blank in Gloucestershire, and you look at that, oh, they're pretty sexy, it's nice stuff, nice foliage trail along there. And if you look at the general slide, and even when you're there, you're looking up at that, and you're not aware of sculpture that is there, you then look more closely. On the left and in more detail on the right, you see these wonderful stylized foliage roundels, which I would maintain would have been originally painted so that they would have stood out much more than they do when you go there today. And one of the other sort of sub-themes that I have, Roman sources. There we have an altar from Corbridge in Northumberland. Yes, Corbridge. And that sort of motif is what we see there. Oh, sorry, I am lying. It's Chester's on the Roman board. A little closer to home, Avington Church. We look at the chancel arch and then on into the chancel, and specifically on the right screen, what I'm doing is to zoom into that sort of area, have a good look at the sculpture when we're there, but then also painted decoration, a la lozenges at Durham. And then, with your binoculars or telephoto lens, what I'm doing is to zoom in to that nice beakhead, or whatever head you want to call it. You can see the amount of paint that is used. But take a look at that and then say, gee, that is really quite close to that console, which is from Corbridge on the wall. And I think this unusual form of tongue that comes out here has to be related. Not that it's a direct one-to-one comparison with some Roman source for the Avington head. Melbourne Port in Somerset. If you've not been there, do. It's a wonderful church to go and explore. Immediately after the conquest, Ravenbold, the Chancellor, the likely patron, and it's really the north and south arches that come in first, the crossing. That, the 14th century rebuilding of what originally would probably have been a segmental arch like this. And it's the capitals that are very interesting. Over half of them are not carved stone, they're stucco. And the stucco has normally been dismissed as a 19th century restoration, which I think is a mistake. I think they are original. There's a detail of the south crossing east respond. And there is a very good article published in the current Somerset Archaeological and Natural History magazine by, I can now say, a former student of mine, because he's recently finished his PhD, Ronald Lvovsky, who's a complete study of Melbourne Port, but particularly pointing out the stucco for the, I think, the first time. That's more amazing than that. And what I'm going to do is just take you back. I don't have a setting one, which is very sloppy, but we're kind of looking through the north wall of the chancel to four roundels that have been reset, and there they are. Robin Downs, who is fieldwork at Somerset, first introduced me to these. Here are the big telephoto shots. And first of all, I said, wow, that's amazing, because it looks sort of like Malmesbury Abbey and the like, so we'll come back to that in a little bit. But it's these two that I'd like you to concentrate on, because as you see, it's the same design, but that damaged area doesn't agree with that. So we've got two pressings here from the same template and in plaster or stucco. I guess that would have been so much more common than survivors would suggest. So it's something else we have to think about in the corpus of Romanesque sculpture as a whole, and with the potential Malmesbury link, thinking, well, again, is this an Anglo-Saxon motif that is carrying on? One famous or infamous piece of sculpture, as far as dating is concerned, is in a church in Worcestershire, spelt Lee. If you look up the entry in Pearson's Buildings of England, he tells us it's pronounced Lie, L-Y-E, but Lee is the spelling. And the sculpture, they're now set up in the south transept, is illustrated for you here, and it's been disputed as anywhere between Anglo-Saxon, Pamela Craig suggested that, anywhere through the early 13th century. And here I think the architectural setting is absolutely essential, because originally it was set up here, it's taken out for restoration, so it was a niche on the north side of the nave. There is the general view. So why not date it with the fabric? Late 11th century, details go with Worcester. These are the details at Lie, and these are all Worcester details, the polychrome masonry, the Christian capitals that fit very, very well with the late 11th, early 12th century work there. And within Worcestershire, we can also extend this idea of a figure in a niche above a doorway to Ralph's Lench, I think a good deal later, but that principle is there. I will finish up with something that is perhaps most controversial, but it's good. And I was telling Ron Baxter about some of the things I might do. He gave a little chuckle and said, well, it'll be good to ruffle a few feathers. So here I am, feather rustling, maybe. Malmesbury Abbey, general view of the nave looking towards the east, north elevation on the left. So we're looking at that there you see the pulpit, your location. And the dating of Malmesbury Abbey, Romanesque fabric, has moved around a fair bit. If we go into the 19th century, it was generally recognised that it would be by Roger, Bishop of Salisbury, 1102 to 39, who is documented as building at Malmesbury. Sadly, not that it was the castle and the abbey, or the castle or the cathedral, but he built there. And I think it's most important to note that Roger was, perhaps it's not too strong, he was an obsessive builder, and very, very fancy, big stuff as well. 1975, Christopher Wilson published an article on the West Bays of Worcester Cathedral, where he gave quite a long preamble on Malmesbury and the dating of Malmesbury, and noted that he thought it was going to be by the subsequent abbey, Peter Morant, 1141 to 58. I'd like to suggest to you that what we see, if not in absolute date, certainly for the start of the building, is Bishop Roger. Things are underway before 1139, perhaps as early as the 1120s. And one of the problems, at least in the earlier literature, was that, pointed arches, must be Gothic. And so we refer to Abbot Suger and Saint Denis, 1140, and onward goes, but it has to be after that. And I would suggest to you that I think that is fundamentally wrong. Here, the Burgundian connection that was put forward through Abbot Peter Morant and Wilson's article saying, well, pointed arches, yes, you get those in Burgundy. So I show you Town Cathedral, Abbey Church of Fontenay on the right. And I suppose I should say it's another fly in the ointment if you introduce the Cistercians into this. I would like to leave the Cistercians and Burgundy out of the equation and refer instead to things further west. Exeter Cathedral to begin with. Hard to read this, but I can tell you that we're looking here at the south transept. We can also look at the north, but there is an enclosed pointed arch there from the original 1112 to 14 fabric, but so much easier to read. If we go up the road to Crediton, crossing of Crediton Church, there you see perfectly formed pointed arches which can act as a source for pointed arches at Malmesbury. And there are many, many examples of pointed arches if you go down into Cornwall, Devon and Somerset as well. And for what it's worth, I guess I should say, I think it's quite likely that Old Sarum Cathedral had pointed arches. There are many motifs we can look at Malmesbury. I'll give you just a smattering before I finish. But perhaps one of the key things is this. This is a big spur base. These are in the North Nave aisle, the spons, and here are the big spurs. And as with much I said this evening, this is not a Thurlby original. This is Stuart Riggold, writing in 1977 his study of Romanesque bases. And he looked at the bases at Malmesbury and said, you know, I think if we look at the bases, it's likely to be before 1150. And I think he's spot on. Look, please, you can email me if you find post-1150 big spur bases like this. Well, the ones I've looked at are pre-1150. So that would fit with a Roger dating for it. There's one at Hereford. Where am I here? Leominster. Now there's Malmesbury, this is Leominster here, and I throw in Crediton as well, all I believe well before the mid-12th century. And this is one that I think is remarkably pleasing. Paterai, Sarum, Malmesbury, Sarum. Okay, so the outer ones are from Old Sarum Cathedral, documented as Bishop Roger before 1139, and there is one at Malmesbury. And I think the link is very, very important indeed. For label masks, there's one from Sarum, that is the two from Malmesbury there. Again, they fit in the same family quite happily. This Greek or meander motif, that's at Sherborne, another Bishop Roger building. And we can also compare details at Malmesbury, left and centre, with Gloucester Cathedral. This is in the chapter house, and part of the chapter house that was rebuilt after a fire of 1122. And it's particularly the foliage you see there in relation to that brings in, I think, a very close relationship. And I should mention in this connection that way back, 1990, 1995 or 6, Jim King wrote not only on the Sarum Master, but also connections between Sarum and the Herefordshire's. That ruffled a few feathers, I think, but I think he's spot on with that. And to throw Gloucester into this equation is something that I think is very, very important to me. So think of Sarum, Gloucester, Herefordshire at school, and now Malmesbury as well. And with that in mind, that is one of the gallery capitals at Malmesbury. There is one from Gloucester Chapter House. And you will recognise that they're pretty unusual to have this inverted semicircle with knobs on the end, slightly larger at Gloucester. That is so rare that there, I think, has to be a link between the two. And one other thing that is odd at Malmesbury, you see at the gallery level, we have these diagonally set capitals. Where do we get it? Devices, again, documented, Bishop Roger, and also fragments from Sarum Cathedral as well. So that link with Roger goes, I think, very, very well indeed. The final thing, perhaps the greatest ruffling of feathers, brings me to the sculpture of Malmesbury. It's been dated around a bit as late even as 1170, 1180 time, maybe even into the 80s. So there, the south porch, east and west. I would note that if we look at the angels here, that head and that head look as if they could be Anglo-Saxon. It's wonderful antiquarianism that we do there. But then we've also got here our Paterae, that's at Lullington, related by Roger Stalley to Sarah, and I think very convincingly. Here, Malmesbury, the Roundels, and then I think the Apostles with what we have at Lullington as a reflection of Bishop Roger of Salisbury. Sadly, no documentation, but can we have 1130s or 40s? And with that in mind, we can go up to Alexander's Flares of Lincoln Cathedral. It's the panel of the elect in heaven. And it was, I think, 1953 where George Chernetsky said, you know, this is not a million miles removed from what we have at Malmesbury. Alexander was nephew of Bishop Roger of Salisbury. Family connection. I could probably go on for a lot longer. I'm getting very dry, not to say hot, so I think it's time for a drink. Thank you very much.
Malcolm has kindly agreed to take questions, and I think we have a time for a few anyway. So please, any questions that you would like to put to Malcolm?
I should have said, thank you all for coming. I'm overwhelmed. Very rare thing. People sitting
front row.
Yes, we have a question.
Thank you.
Yes.
Quite a simple one. I was quite interested by the sort of the examples you brought up of polychrome detailing claimed to be later inserts, because largely it looked to me like it's a different stone. It must be later. It looks incongruous. But I was wondering about how that you think that might interact with painted polychrome, and whether that would serve with painted polychrome. And whether that might serve to bridge the apparent gap between the stone types, or whether it could be used to emphasise it alternatively.
That's good. I can't really think of a profound answer. It's certainly something we can look at very, very closely. When different stones are used, I think we saw most clearly in the Herefordshire work, I think the choice is going to be what they consider to be the best stone for sculpture that is relatively easy to get hold of, so they don't have to import it, so Carnstone from the best stone they can regionally for Hereford, and anywhere else. But if you're working as at Marcus with tufa, well, that's disastrous sculpture with that. Although I guess I can mention Courtauld, which is just close to Schroeder, south of Schroeder, a documented chapel of the late 80s, I think it's Bishop, what is his name? It's gone at the moment. But it's built of tufa, and they try to fill in the tufa with plaster. So it comes back again over the idea of using plaster.
Anybody else? Yes.
Malcolm, thank you for that. And I have a question about MS Claudius. Was it A4? B4?
B4.
Yes.
B4.
So I noticed that. Is that circa 1,000 that you have on there?
Oh, I'm not good on names. That's 1,000 to the first half of the look up. Manuscript references, get them exactly the details from there.
My question is, how do you account for the spread of cushion capitals after the conquest, when there was an Anglo-Saxon precedent?
I think it's that. Oh, sure. I'm being asked about cushion capitals and the fact, my idea that they would be used in Anglo-Saxon times, but then after the conquest, the proliferation of the motif in so many churches, to which I think I'd add not least Canterbury, St Augustine and Canterbury Cathedral, both good Norman buildings, especially Canterbury Cathedral, where it's land frank, the previously in Carn, but we choose to use cushion capitals rather than volumes that we use over Norman. Other than the Anglo-Saxon link, I think there may be two factors involved. One is that they're imperial. That's quite prestigious to use. Also, if you're importing them, which I think is it Marquis stone that is used for some of the Canterbury capitals, it's real good for packing and export. And you can pack these things close together and ship them wherever. There's a convenience aspect as well. So I wouldn't favour one over the other. I think sometimes, well, Worcester, for example, I think they can be read iconographically. I think they are seen as specifically Anglo-Saxon. It's an Anglo-Saxon patron, but Anglo-Saxon saints there as well. So on the one hand, we have the massive size. So Wolston is keeping up with Norman Joneses of this world, but making Saxon reference wherever he can. So there's Saxon, very good things here in England.
Give me time for one more.
I was very interested by pushing back the date for pointed arches. I wondered if you
had any thoughts about pointed arches over windows at all, and whether those can be pushed back at all.
Pointed arches over windows is the question. Did I have any thoughts? And the short answer is no. But what could I say? I would look. Do you have examples in mind?
Well, I'm looking particularly at the moment at building at Leicester Castle.
Okay.
And we've just had some tree dating for it, which is pushing that back, and it has what I think is an original pointed arch of 1150s, 1160s.
Oh, fine. Yeah.
Happy with that?
problem.
It seems quite early, particularly in a secular context, but...
Thank you.
I'll scratch my head. Give me an email address.
And you have a chance in a moment, because it only remains for me to say thank you very much to Malcolm, both for the lecture and for your response.